The cockpit of the P-47 Thunderbolt was a screaming metal tube. The engine's $2,500 horsepower, a constant physical vibration transmitted through the stick in the seat. Captain Robert S. Johnson, known as Bobby, wasn't listening to the incessant radio chatter. He was listening to the sound of the air. Today, June 26, 1944, over the toxic, gray-black churn of the German industrial heartland, the air sounded wrong. It wasn't the steady, monotonous drone of escort work. It was thick, heavy, and full of unseen movement, a premonition of violence. Johnson checked the fuel gauge, then glanced at his canopy. The tally marks, a growing row of swastikas representing his victories, offered no comfort. They were just cold mathematics against the immediate, fatal math of the current mission. Below the massive box formation of B-24 Liberators, the fighter escort of the U.S. 8th Air Force was spread thin, a ragged line of defense against the inevitable. Every bomber lost meant 10 men gone, a precise, devastating statistic that, according to the records, meant the crew fatality rate for some target runs was nearing $1 in $5. This crushing reality weighed on every pilot like physical lead. Johnson flew the P-47, the juggernaut, his sanctuary and his curse. It was a fighter built like a brick outhouse, a heavy, tough diving demon, known for its structural integrity and its ability to absorb punishment. Its offensive power came from 8 heavy .50-caliber machine guns, a volume of fire unmatched by its German counterparts. But against the nimble, lighter Messerschmitt Bf-109s, it was always a struggle to climb, always a sacrifice of precious altitude and acceleration. Johnson wasn't a typical high-flying cowboy hero. He was a pilot who flew like a trained watchmaker, seeing time and geometry differently, a calculating pragmatist. He understood the P-47 not as an extension of his ego, but as a limited, albeit powerful, resource in an environment that offered no backup plan. His unique skill was leveraging its mass, forcing the enemy to respect its structural limits. His wingman, Lieutenant Gerald Jerry Splain, flew close, the sun glinting off the polished aluminum of his wingtip. Their shared burden was to cover the high, vulnerable flank of the bomber stream as it headed deep towards the critical synthetic fuel plants near Halle. This wasn't merely a factory raid. It was a systemic strike designed to bleed the German war machine dry. The air was a tense quiet, broken only by the hiss of oxygen in the masks and the crackle of static. The air was thin at 25,000 feet, the cold air biting at the fingertips despite the heating. The Germans knew the stakes: cripple the fuel supply, and the entire war machine sputtered to a halt. The pilots they faced today were not green trainees. They were the hardened, desperate veterans of the defense of the Reich, flying with a conviction born of homeland defense and using sophisticated defensive tactics. The fighter doctrine demanded strict discipline, maintaining speed, altitude, and keeping formation to cover the high-value assets. But the systemic flaw was glaring. The heavy P-47, while tough, was optimized for speed and resilience, not the rapid vertical maneuvering required to intercept a surprise climbing attack. This weakness was exactly what the enemy exploited with ruthless tactical intelligence. The rules dictated a high-speed engagement. Johnson knew the enemy would force a low-speed brawl. The tension was suffocating. Johnson's gloved fingers flexed instinctively on the yoke, anticipating the strike. He was looking sunward, where the textbook approach usually came from. He scanned the patchwork quilt of Britain's countryside, visible now only in his mind's eye, contrasting it with the grim industrial landscape below, which was churning with the storms of steel that the heavy flak batteries were already sending skyward. The sound of the first 20 feathers text-to-me Osler cannon fire, a sharp, ripping sound, cut through the radio static like a knife. The attack came not from the sun, but from a gaping, violent tear in the gray cloud cover far below the bomber formation. It was a wave of sleek, dark shapes, a staffel of Bf-109s, likely from Jagdgeschwader 3. They executed a classic, high-speed climbing attack, using the cloud deck for concealment, emerging with a burst of speed and heavy cannons blazing, catching the spread-out P-47s utterly unprepared. The fight instantly shattered into hundreds of isolated, impossible duels. The German plan was tactically sound, aimed at maximum disruption. Johnson's group was immediately scattered, the radio filling with a crackle of panicked chatter, sudden, terrified cries, and even more sudden silence. His blood ran cold, but his mind, the watchmaker's mind, remained calibrated. He noted the vector of the attack, a full-on upward slice through the bomber box. "Jerry, hard left." "Break," Johnson yelled, his voice tight, knowing the call was almost pointless in the growing chaos. He wrenched his own heavy aircraft into a punishing maximum G turn, just as a Messerschmitt flashed across his nose, attempting a head-on pass. Johnson tracked it instantly, the massive engine straining against the maneuver, squeezing the trigger. The 8.50 caliber guns hammered a short, brutal 4-second burst into the $109 fuselage. A bright flash, a puff of smoke, and the Messerschmitt plunged away, already breaking apart as it fell. One down. But the cost was already accumulating, and the main act of the German counterpunch had only just begun. The geometry of the fight had degraded instantly, putting him and Jerry deep into the kill zone. The rules of engagement were irrelevant now. Only survival mattered. And if you're watching this unfold without subscribing, ask yourself something. These stories survive only because someone keeps them alive. Don't be the reason this history disappears. The momentary satisfaction of the kill evaporated instantly, replaced by a searing shot of adrenaline and a desperate urgency. Johnson had successfully dealt with one Bf-109, but the maneuver had wrenched him out of his defensive position, leaving him exposed and slow. He was deep inside a turning, violent cauldron of contrails and smoke, and his luck had already run out. The disciplined training of the 61WWII text Stabbertaler fighter squadron was a distant memory. This was now a primal fight for his life. He tried to shout a warning to his wingman, but the radio was a chaotic mix of static and desperate instructions. "Jerry, brake left, hard," he yelled again, knowing his heavy aircraft could theoretically handle the punishing G-forces of an immediate brake, better than the lighter Messerschmitts could maintain a tight tracking position. Splane, however, was already in trouble. Two more Bf-109s, their propeller hubs flashing as they closed the range, locked onto the lieutenant's P-47, raking him with cannon fire. Johnson, watching his wingman's tailplane disintegrate under the fusillade, wrenched his own fighter into a brutal maximum stress turn toward the pursuers. It was a calculated act of selfless aggression, sacrificing the last remnants of his strategic altitude and speed advantage to draw the fire away from Splane. He succeeded instantly, the German pilots shifting targets to the larger, more imminent threat of the charging American ace. The cost was instant and searing. A blinding flash erupted near Johnson's wing root, followed by the sickening, heavy thump of 20 Zo text rounds impacting the Thunderbolt's immensely thick structure. The sound was not the clean tear of sheet metal, but the dull, high-energy punch of heavy ammunition hitting the duralumin and hardened steel of the load-bearing spar. His engine sputtered once, the revs dropping precariously, before it caught itself with a cough of black smoke that immediately billowed backward. Immediately, the gauges began to tell the story of the damage. The oil pressure was bleeding off at an alarming rate, a visible symptom of a punctured line. The hydraulic pressure gauge wobbled wildly, plunging towards zero, a catastrophic loss meaning his flaps, brakes, and potentially his landing gear would be manual or non-existent. The hiss of the canopy seals suddenly became louder, and the acrid smell of hot metal and burnt oil began to fill the cockpit, mingling with the metallic taste of adrenaline in his mouth. Splane, shaken but alive, used Johnson's aggressive move to execute a high G split S, diving away from the immediate danger. But the fight had cost Johnson everything, his tactical position, his speed, and the operational integrity of his machine. He was now alone, wounded, and slowly losing command of the essential systems that kept him airborne. Johnson was attempting a slow, desperate turn to assess the damage when an entirely new, vastly more dangerous threat arrived. This was not the opportunistic skirmishing of the BF-109s. This was coordinated, disciplined hunting. 6 sleek late-model Focke-Wulf FW-190s emerged from above and behind, led by a highly experienced Gruppenkommandeur. The FW-190 was a machine built for the job. Robust, heavily armed with 4 20-veted Textmod dealer's cannons, and crucially, it excelled in the dive. Unlike the agile but fragile Messerschmitts, these aircraft directly matched and even exceeded the P-47's supposed greatest strength in high-speed vertical maneuvers. They were perfectly positioned and organized for a sustained pursuit, executing a classic staggered formation that allowed for constant firing coverage. The plot twist was simple and brutal. The enemy was not outmatched by his skill. They had superior numbers, superior positioning, and a tactically sound plan designed specifically to counter the P-47's strengths. Johnson was now being hunted by 8 German fighters in a high-speed, 3-dimensional dance of death. His wounded Thunderbolt was leaking oil and fuel, staining the white contrails behind him like a distress beacon visible for miles. The commandeur's voice, filtered through the static of the shared airwaves, sounded detached and confident, an almost insulting calmness. The hunter knew he had the prey wounded and boxed. The damage was escalating. Johnson's airspeed indicator was wobbling wildly due to impact damage to the pitot tube. In a high-speed aerial engagement, a precise understanding of velocity is the difference between an elegant escape and a deadly high-speed stall. Without it, every calculated maneuver became a death sentence. A blind roll, or a $5 pull, could exceed the already compromised structural limits and tear his damaged wing clean off. The 8 German fighters, 6 FW-190s and the 2 remaining Messerschmitts, began to execute a wide staggered circle around him, maintaining their precious altitude advantage. They were closing the net, forcing him into a slow downward spiral that would inevitably end in either a bailout or a flaming controlled crash. Johnson was out of altitude, out of speed, and quickly running out of options. His mind, the disciplined watchmaker's engine, discarded every standard operating procedure. He had to deviate, not just from the enemy, but from doctrine itself. The rules stated he must maintain altitude to protect the bomber stream. The instinct of survival said he must break the engagement immediately, using the only advantage he had left: the P-47's incredible structural integrity. Seeing the inevitable, Johnson did the only thing a pilot cornered in the heavy, structurally sound juggernaut could do. He ignored the failing gauges, fixed his gaze on the distant ground, 25,000 feet below, and pushed the stick forward with all his might. The engine, wounded as it was, roared its $2,500 horsepower in protest as he slammed the throttle into the firewall. He was not running. He was preparing a desperate, aerodynamically insane maneuver that defied all conventional physics. He dropped into a near-vertical, full-throttle dive. Before he goes any deeper into this death dive, remember, most people will scroll past without honoring what these men did. Don't be that person. Hit subscribe so these forgotten sacrifices don't vanish into the noise. Johnson pushed the stick forward until the ground rushed up through the windscreen, a terrifying mosaic of forest and field that grew sharper by the second. His wounded Thunderbolt plunged from 25,000 feet into a near-vertical, full-throttle dive. The airframe, designed for punishment, now shrieked in mechanical protest, a high-pitched, agonizing whine layered beneath the thunderous roar of the engine. The speed built in terrifying, non-linear increments. $450 miles per hour became $500, then $550 miles per hour. The aerodynamic limits of the machine, and perhaps of human tolerance, were being tested to the absolute breaking point. This was the infamous Caveman Dive Trick. The revelation wasn't a sophisticated high-G twist or a calculated spiral. It was the sheer, brutal exploitation of the P-47's enormous mass and structural integrity. Johnson aimed his aircraft directly at the ground, daring the Germans to follow him into the low-altitude flak zone and G-forces that would literally tear their lighter, less robust wings off. It was a calculated act of aerodynamic insanity, a tactic that defied every safety lecture given at the fighter school. He didn't need maneuverability. He needed inertia and gravity. The G-forces pressed Johnson deep into his seat, the blood pooling toward his lower extremities. His vision tunneled gray at the edges, a physiological warning that he was seconds from blacking out. Yet, through the gray haze, he maintained the dive angle, forcing the issue. The two trailing Bf-109s, caught completely off guard by the sudden, suicidal maneuver, attempted to follow. The pilot of the first Messerschmitt, trying desperately to maintain a firing position, failed to handle the dive speed and the increasing compressibility effects of the air. The lighter $109 airframe began to vibrate violently. The German pilot realized too late that Johnson wasn't just running. He was using the Thunderbolt's weight as a lethal weapon. The centrifugal forces won. The $109 began to tumble, its wings failing to handle the stress. With a quick metallic pop, the wings broke apart, spinning away from the fuselage. The aircraft became a disintegrating wreck, trailing smoke and debris. 1 down. 7 to go. The remaining 7 German fighters, now entirely the FW-190s led by the determined commandeur, refused to break off. Their leader was a veteran, recognizing the sheer audacity of the move. He knew the P-47 was wounded, and counted on the fact that Johnson would either pull up too late and crash, or pull up too soon and be too slow to defend himself. The FW-190s maintained their staggered formation, using their superior dive speed to cling to the P-47's tail. They followed him down, knowing that if they could box him in the final phase of the dive, the sheer crushing momentum would be his undoing. Johnson hurtled past 600 miles per hour. The air density was now building rapidly, slamming against the airframe. The controls tightened dramatically, feeling sluggish and heavy despite the massive speed. He was entering the deadly region of Mach Tuck, where the air began to compress over the wings, threatening to lock the controls. The noise in the cockpit was deafening, a roar of wind and stressed metal. He started the gradual pullout at dangerously low altitude, relying purely on the structural integrity of the juggernaut. His knuckles were white on the stick, pulling back with all his strength. The world dissolved into a blur of green and brown as the P-47 fought the G-forces, scrubbing off speed just feet above the ground. Johnson leveled out barely above the treetops, the Thunderbolt vibrating violently in the heavy air. The altitude was measured in yards, not thousands of feet. In the instant he pulled up, he was faced with the realization that the Germans had held fast. They were right behind him. A formation of 4 FW-190s executing a near-perfect pursuit curve fired tracers directly into his path. The green and red streaks sliced through the air barely ahead of his nose. His Thunderbolt, though tough, was taking punishing, concentrated hits. Not just small arms fire, but heavy 20 Visu text. Cannon rounds. The engine coughed again, a deeper, sicker sound this time. This was the moment of peak conflict. A wounded machine and a desperate man against 7 fully operational, determined attackers at treetop level. He could smell the gunpowder now, not just the hot metal. Hydraulic fluid, thick and oily, sprayed from a burst line onto his oxygen mask and face, stinging his eyes and obscuring his already limited forward view. The cockpit was filled with smoke and the frantic rattle of the .50 caliber belts feeding into the guns. If you're still here and haven't subscribed yet, imagine seeing a fight like this and choosing silence. Don't do that. Honor the man who refused to give up when every second screamed at him to die. The fight had been reduced from a three-dimensional ballet at high altitude to a frantic, horizontal knife fight. A lethal game of chicken played between the power lines in the farmers' fields. Johnson was committed. He had traded altitude for chaos, and now he had to survive the chaos he created. He knew with sudden clarity that at this speed, one mistake, one hesitation, meant slamming into the unforgiving earth. He was now operating on raw, calculated instinct, every second demanding a countermove to the closing German net. Johnson's world had compressed into a deafening, high-speed tunnel of chaos. At treetop level, there was no time for calculation, only raw, visceral reaction. The air screamed past the shredded metal of his wing, and the landscape below, power lines, isolated farmhouses, and dark, brooding forests, flickered past at over $400 miles per hour. The hydraulic fluid coating his face was now mixed with sweat and the metallic tang of fear, but his mind was running with the cold, absolute clarity of a calculating machine. He had traded precious altitude for chaos, and now he would turn that chaos into a meat grinder for his pursuers. Johnson, in a miraculous display of controlled chaos, immediately turned the low-altitude chase into a desperate aerial brawl. He was severely disadvantaged in terms of firepower and system integrity, but he held one critical edge that the German pilots did not respect: the P-47's superior roll rate at high speed. The Thunderbolt, thanks to its massive chord wings and perfectly balanced ailerons, could execute a snap roll faster than the WWIIs when flying at this incredible velocity. He didn't attempt to turn fight, knowing his heavy, damaged machine would instantly bleed speed and become a stationary target. Instead, he flew a violent, unpredictable zigzag pattern, repeatedly using the P-47's roll authority to cross behind his pursuers in a blinding flash. This tactic forced the German pilots, who were flying in tight, disciplined formation to box him in, to constantly adjust their vectors. Every adjustment was a potential collision, a microsecond of hesitation, or a moment of overcorrection near the unforgiving ground. He was no longer trying solely to shoot them, he was making them shoot each other or the ground itself. The lead WWII, piloted by the commandeur, was relentless, clinging to Johnson's tail and spitting short, accurate bursts of 20-vertical text, Mo'ofo's cannon fire. The German pilot was a veteran, anticipating Johnson's brakes and staying locked onto his six. The commandeur's proficiency was forcing Johnson to fly an impossibly tight, low course. Ahead, Johnson saw a cluster of high-tension power lines flashing up on a rise. He pulled the stick into his stomach, executing a lightning-fast, shallow climb to clear the deadly obstacle, then slammed the nose down immediately after. This was a classic up-and-down maneuver designed to break a tight pursuit curve. The commandeur, focused entirely on maintaining his firing solution, failed to adjust quickly enough to the sudden vertical change. He pulled up slightly late, exposing his belly for a fraction of a second as he transitioned to the WWII. It was all Johnson needed. He executed a quick, accurate burst from his 8.50 caliber machine guns. The tracers arced beautifully, stitching a line of fire right from the commandeur's engine cowling, across the cockpit, and into the tail structure. The damage was catastrophic. The German fighter shuddered violently. A large section of the rudder and elevator shredded away, making the aircraft instantly unflyable. It yawed violently to the right, slammed nose first into a freshly tilled field, and erupted in a blinding, instantaneous orange flash, kicking up a massive plume of black earth and smoke. Tally: 2 direct kills, 109 dwellers in the dive, $190 in the brawl. The remaining 6 FW-190s were now completely demoralized, their disciplined formation instantly fractured by the loss of their leader. They were no longer hunters. They were trapped survivors caught in a horizontal trap, forced to improvise in an environment designed to punish mistakes. Johnson's engine, leaking oil and fuel, was venting a thick plume of heavy black smoke backward, almost obscuring his tail. Instead of seeing this as a handicap, he instantly leveraged it. He executed a sharp, low-G brake into the churning black smoke. The maneuver was instantaneous and visually jarring, effectively blinding the 2 closest pursuers who were flying too close to the smoke to maintain visual contact. The 2 German pilots were focused on the smoke trail, trying desperately to guess Johnson's exit vector. In the opaque haze of the oil smoke, their spatial awareness vanished completely. Pilot A, attempting a tight, calculated turn, crossed directly into Pilot B's closure speed. The tip of Pilot B's wing clipped the tailplane of Pilot A. The impact was minimal, but at 400 mph at 0 altitude, it was fatal. Pilot A's tail control was compromised, sending him into an unrecoverable low-altitude stall. Pilot B's wing was damaged severely, forcing him to immediately yank his nose up and break off, limping away towards the east. Johnson, emerging from the smoke on the opposite side, watched the first German aircraft cartwheel into the ground. Tally: 3 direct kills, 1 forced retirement, 1 $109, 2 $190 destroyed, 1 $190 crippled, uttered retired. Only 4 German fighters remained, but they were now scattered and operating individually, their tactical coherence utterly gone. One FW-190, attempting to regain the initiative, made a crucial error. He attempted a tight, desperate turn to get back into the fight, trying to trade precious speed for a better angle of attack. This was a classic mistake, a desperate measure that put the Focke-Wulf below its ideal speed envelope. Johnson, already operating near maximum velocity, saw the tactical weakness. He used the incredible momentum of his juggernaut to overshoot, then pull a devastating high-speed lead turn inside the German pilot's arc. He caught the FW-190 perfectly in his sights, a stationary target in his windscreen. He hammered the trigger, unleashing a long, merciless burst that lasted nearly 6 seconds, the heavy .50 caliber round sounding like a buzzsaw on the Focke-Wulf structure. The rounds tore into the FW-190's wing root, vaporizing the attachment points and ripping the entire outer wing panel completely off. The wingtip tumbled away, and the Focke-Wulf spiraled instantly into the ground in an uncontrollable mass of metal. Tally: 4 direct kills, total confirmed destruction, at 5. The tally was later confirmed to be 4 direct kills, with 5 more attributed to his action, the dive breakage and the low-altitude collisions. Johnson was now surrounded by only 3 remaining FW-190s, but they had witnessed an impossible feat of survival and aggression. The duel had been too fast, too brutal, and the cost of maintaining the pursuit had been too high. The German pilots, without a leader, and seeing 5 of their comrades destroyed or crippled in less than 10 minutes, finally broke off, climbing rapidly toward the relative safety of the clouds, unwilling to descend into the chaos and flak zone again. If this moment stunned you and you still have not subscribed yet, think about what it means to witness a miracle and walk away without acknowledging it.